Alrighty. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. My name is Olivia. I am a bookseller at Belmont Books. And for those of you who don't know, Belmont Books is an independently owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts, and we've been bringing books to the community since 2016. Before we begin, I'd like to just do a little bit of housekeeping. We have a number of excellent virtual events coming up in October. Tomorrow night on October 1st, we have the author of All the Best Lies in conversation with the author of The Missing Ones, so an excellent night of mystery with Joanna Schaffhausen and Edwin Hill. On Saturday, October 3rd, we have an Instagram live story time with Rebecca Walsh. You can register for all of these and more on our website, belmontbooks.com, which is also where you can purchase tonight's books, A Children's Bible and Migrations. A reminder just to all of our guests that your audio and video should remain off. Please feel free to ask questions after we've gotten through our discussion and our readings. I will relay as many to Lydia and Charlotte as I can. So I am so excited to introduce Lydia Millet and Charlotte McConaghy. Lydia has won awards from the Penn Center and the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Her books have been longlisted for the National Book Award. Speaking of which, congratulations for the longlisting of A Children's Bible. Personally, I believe it's entirely deserved. It's one of my favorite books that I've read this year. Her short story collection, Love in Infant Monkeys, was a Pulitzer Prize finalist. Charlotte is an author and screenwriter based in Sydney, Australia, joining us here from the other side of the planet today. Migrations is her US debut. So if you guys want to do some readings first, that would be awesome. I'm so excited to hear you guys read your phenomenal books. They're both so beautiful.
Who would you like to go first?
Charlotte, do you want to go first?
Yes, sure. Okay, so I'm just going to read a little section. I hope it's not too long, but it's just something that's kind of sits apart. So it's from chapter 2. I was born Franny Stone. My Irish mother gave birth to me in a small Australian town where she'd been left broken alone. She nearly died in the birthing, too far from the nearest hospital, but live she did, a survivor to her call. I don't know how she found the money, but not long after we moved back to Galway, and there I spent the first decade of my life in a wooden house so close to the sea, I was able to tune my swift child's pulse to the shh of the neap and spring tides. I thought we were called Stone because we lived in a town surrounded by low stone walls that snaked silver through the hilly yellow fields. The second I was able to walk, I wandered along those curving walls, and I ran my fingers over their rough edges, and I knew they must lead to the place from where I truly came. Because one thing was clear to me from the start: I didn't belong. I wandered through cobbled streets or into paddocks, where long grass whispered hish as I passed between. Neighbours would find me exploring the flowers in their gardens, or out in the far hills climbing one of the trees so bent by the wind that its brittle fingers now reached sideways along the earth. They'd say, "Watch this one, Iris. She's got itchy feet, and that's a tragedy." Mum hated me being critiqued like that, but she was honest about having been abandoned by my dad. She wore the wound of it like a badge of honour. It had happened all her life. People left her, and the only way to bear it was proudly. But she would say to me most mornings that if I ever left her, that would be it, the final curse, and she would give up. So I stayed and stayed until one day I couldn't stay any longer. I was made of a different kind of thing. We had no money, but we went often to the library. According to Mum, inside the pages of a novel lived the only beauty offered up by the world. Mum would set the table with plate, cup, and book. We'd read through meals, while she bathed me, while we lay shivering in our beds, listening to the scream of wind through the cracked windows. We'd read while we balanced on the low rock walls that Seamus Heaney made famous in his poetry, a way to leave without really leaving. Then one day, just outside Galway, where the changing light leaches the blue from the water and drapes it over the long grass, I met a boy and he told me a story. There was a lady long ago who spent her life coughing up feathers, and one day when she was gnarled and grey, she stretched from a woman into a blackbird. From then on, dusk held her in its thrall, and night's great yawning mouth swallowed her whole. He told me this, and then the boy kissed me with vinegar lips from the chips he was eating, and I decided that this was my favourite story of all, and that I wanted to be a bird when I was grey. After that, how could I not run away with him? I was 10 years old. I packed a satchel filled only with books and I heaved it over my shoulder and set off, just briefly, just for a nose-about, a wee adventure, nothing more. We rolled out with the storm that very same afternoon and wound our way up the coast of Ireland until his great sprawling family decided to turn their cars and caravans inland. I didn't want to leave the sea, so I snuck away without anyone noticing and spent 2 days on the stormy shore. This was where I belonged, where all the silver walls led, to salt and sea and wind pockets that could carry you away. But in the night I slept and I dreamt of feathers in my lungs, so many I choked on them. I woke coughing and frightened and knew I'd made a mistake. How could I have left her? The walk to a village was longer than any I'd tried, and the books grew so heavy. I started leaving them on the road, a trail of words in my wake. I hoped they would help someone find their way. A kind lady in the bakery fed me soda bread, then paid for my bus ticket and waited with me until it arrived. She hummed instead of talking, and the tune got stuck in my head so that even after I'd left her at the station, I kept hearing her voice deep in my ears. When I arrived home, my mother was gone. And that was that. Perhaps the feathers had come for her, like they whispered they would in my dream. Perhaps my father had returned for her, or the strength of her sadness had turned her invisible. Either way, my wandering feet had abandoned her, like she'd warned me they would. I was taken from my mother's home and sent back to Australia to live with my paternal grandmother. I didn't see the point in staying in any one place after that. I only ever tried once more, many years later, when I met a man called Niall Lynch, and we loved each other with brands to our names and bodies and souls. I tried for Niall like I did for my mother. I really did. But the rhythms of the sea's tides are the only things we humans have not destroyed. That will probably be plenty.
That was fantastic. Lydia, you want to go next?
Sure. I can't, I don't have the accent, so I feel I'm at a disadvantage because it's so lovely. But I will read in my tedious, grating American accent. Let's see. Just about 3 pages, maybe, from the beginning of chapter 2, which I don't normally read from, but I'm bored of reading the same thing again and again from chapter 1. So this book looks like this, and it, for those of you who haven't read it, concerns a group of children and also teenagers who are taken to a sort of rambling summer house by their parents and forced to abide with each other there during the summer without resorting to their devices. They have their phones taken away and their and their tablets and their laptops, and so they live in this analog world for a short time until things happen. Anyway, they have a habit of leaving their parents and taking a small rowboat and going down to the ocean on a river, on a creek, I guess, near the big house. And so this is chapter 2 when they do that. A shock when we reached the delta with its braiding and shifting sandbars. Unwelcome colonists had beached upon our shores. Before, when we'd come down to the ocean, the dunes had been deserted except for birds and waving grasses. The waterfront had been ours to wander in peace, with its hermit crabs and driftwood and seaweed. Now there were others, a barbecue. Meat was grilling, and the smell of it carried. There were beach parasols in bright red and white stripes. Where had they come from? You could only get here by boat. Yep, there it was, a majestic yacht in cream and gold was bobbing loftily offshore. Up the beach, teens played volleyball. We felt aggrieved, but had no strategy, and no moral high ground either. It was a public place. The situation rankled. If we were patient, though, the sun would soon go down, and we'd be on our own. Meanwhile, we set up our makeshift shelter on the other side of the braided waters, a pavilion with no walls and the threadbare tarps from the tool shed for a roof, their vinyl peeling off in ragged patches. We tied the tarps to shrubs on the edge of the dunes, balanced them on fishing rods and ski poles. They wouldn't bear much of a breeze. We had sleeping bags and folded up clothes for pillows. But at least till dawn came, as the colonists dozed in their luxury berths, we'd have our private empire of salt water and sand. We watched, munching on soggy sandwiches, as the barbecue eaters folded their striped umbrellas. From the yacht, a purring and glossy powerboat came up into the shallows. But hey, what was this? Sailor types in white uniforms leapt out of the boat carrying bundles. In no time, there were sleek-looking tents erected, high-end tents in pearly cream that matched the yacht, Alpine Gear logos on the sides, door flaps and rain flies. 4 of them neatly lined up, a small city above the high tide mark. We stared at those handsome tents. The yacht kids hugged their parents goodnight as we shuddered. The boat sputtered away. A small fire was built around which they sat on matching camp chairs. Even their marshmallow sticks were manufactured. We saw them holding the metal skewers over their fire, roasting. Fine then, we'd have a fire also, a large bonfire. Our fire would dwarf their fire. It would be magnificent. We'd brought logs from the woodpile and ancient copies of the New York Observer we'd found for kindling. Thanks to Rafe, a can of gasoline. Marshmallows were for babies, right? Anyway, we didn't have any. Juicy had won the latest contest and brought an item to destroy, so we stacked up a glorious pile. I set his chosen object on the top of it, an antique wooden pig in a baby bonnet with very long lashes. Before long, the flames were leaping high. Black smoke and acrid fumes, including gas and possibly lead paint, sailed downwind toward the yacht kids. It served them right, said Rafe. We cackled like witches over the blaze. After a while, headlamps came bobbing toward us. Yacht kids were wading manfully across the delta, barefoot and tanned, their shorts exactly the right length. Some of us stood up proudly. Others adopted more submissive postures. Hey, guys, said the tall one in the lead. A sweep of blonde hair fell over his brow. He wore a polo shirt. He was a billboard for Abercrombie and Fitch. Dudes, what an awesome burn. I've got some weed. Anyone want to smoke? Grinning broadly. Shit, yeah, said Juice. And so the empire crumbled. At that time in my personal life, I was coming to grips with the end of the world. The familiar world, anyway. Many of us were. Scientists said it was ending now. Philosophers said it had always been ending. Historians said there had been dark ages before. It all came out in the wash, because eventually, if you were patient, enlightenment arrived, and then a wide array of Apple device assessments were being made. Out. Maybe more cars would switch to electric. That was how we could tell it was serious, because they were obviously lying. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I have absolutely loved living in these worlds that you guys created. I mean, as horrible as they are, the words and the language is so rich and so lovely. So thank you guys both so much for reading for us tonight. I had a couple of questions to get some conversation started if you guys wanted to hear them. One of the heartbreaking themes in each of your books, for me at least, was that it seems your characters exist after a point of concession, that their societies and people are no longer trying to do anything to fix what's happening. But somehow I ultimately felt hopeful coming away from both of your stories. How did you go about weaving hope into these dark places that you're exploring?
Charlotte, do you want to start?
Sure. For me, it was a really fundamental part of the book, that idea that even though I was presenting a very bleak possible future, the book needed to be more than anything else about hope. Franny is the main character. I think she's sort of like humanity is now. She's self-destructive. She's lost all hope and is sort of trying to embrace apathy. Which I think for us is very easy to do because we're surrounded by how terrible things are. We're saturated by bad news. And I think a lot of us just want to switch off. We've kind of lost hope too, I think. So this was always going to be a journey about Franny's rediscovery of hope by facing the terrible loss that she's suffered and still finding the courage to go on. She's kind of reclaiming her wonder of the world, and she's able to recognize all the beautiful things that we haven't yet lost and take strength from them. And I really hope that that's something that we can do. For Franny, it's nature that nourishes her and leads her through and out of the dark. And it was always a touchstone for me when I was writing. I think it's a really great way for us to kind of find emotional nourishment as well, because there is so much that we haven't lost. And I think we can redirect ourselves off this disastrous course.
Yeah, so to the question of hope, I mean, I don't know how to exist without that. I've been thinking lately that hope is, however, just the beginning of things. We have this tendency to sort of invoke hope as though it itself can change the world. But really, it's action that changes the world. And of course, you need hope before you have action. But also, I think many of us, if we remain only in hope, can sort of let that become the white flag of surrender to some degree. So in other words, to sort of comfort ourselves with the idea of hope is also, I think, sometimes to allow ourselves not to take action. So while I do, believe in hope. I mean, you can't, if you're sort of bleakly cynical or nihilistic or whatever, obviously, that won't take you far. That just takes you to a position of, abstaining, I guess, and of irrelevance, but also to be sort of Pollyanna about sort of the beauty and the sort of the good unto itselfness of hope, I think, is also something we have a tendency to, at least to generate rhetoric around in our culture. So anyway, I've been thinking about just hope and action and how really now is maybe a moment for us to proceed from hope to actually fight, to struggle. So for me, this book was really about sort of this schism that I see in right now quite plainly in the U.S. between young generations, young people, and older ones, and where there really is this will to fight among the young and a will to struggle, and this anger at the passivity of my generation, of their parents' generation, and those generations that have gone before that have allowed these various crises, the crisis of extinction and obviously of climate also, to sort of reach the proportions that they have reached. So I really wanted to write about that inflection point where hope turns to anger and to struggle and to resistance, I guess, in current parlance.
I mean, I could expect no less amazing of an answer from either of you guys, honestly. So each of your books features a woman at the twilight of the world. Why did you choose to use female voices as the lens through which we see our world ending?
Well, I mean, I know for me it's just a natural decision being a woman. To be honest, I don't think I'd consider writing a male character or only a male character's point of view at this stage in my life. That's just a personal thing for me. I feel like I'm sort of only just starting to discover the power and necessity in femininity, and that's kind of interesting to me at the moment. I guess in another sense, in terms of quest stories, which Migrations is, end of the world survival stories, particularly sea voyage stories, they tend to be historically the terrain of men and male voices. So I guess I wanted to explore another avenue into them. this being a sea voyage for the end of the world story. I think women have a kind of bodily connection to the sea and its rhythms and tides. And for Franny, it's sort of echoing the depths of her personal loss. The loss that the world is going through is a reflection of what she's lost in her personal life. But I don't think that necessarily hers is a female lens through which to view the end of the world. I think it's instead more of a female lens to view the saving of the world. I think women have immense strength and compassion, and I do kind of wonder if we would be in this mess if, we let women take over the leadership of the world. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, absolutely. Lydia, are you still with us here? You seem to have dipped out a little bit.
Really? I've dipped out?
Yeah, we can still hear you just fine. Your picture must have had a poor connection or something like that.
Oh, wow. Okay. Let's see. Now I've forgotten the question. I got immersed in what Charlotte was saying. But women, why did I pick a woman's voice or a girl's, like, I don't know. She's 16, so whatever, somewhere in between voice. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've used a lot of I've written a lot of male narrators and a lot of female ones in the past, and this one actually, I wanted to write sort of like a wish fulfillment fantasy for me because it's about this 16-year-old. I have a 16-year-old daughter also, and her love for her little brother. I also have a son who's only slightly older than the little boy in the book. So this is sort of a wish fulfillment fantasy of like sibling love, where it's really about the protectiveness, or so much in the book is about the sort of protective love that the sister feels for her little brother. And that was kind of the emotional, whatever, pull of it for me. I wanted to write that love, that she has. And so it had to be a kind of, in this case, a kind of a sisterly love. And so it had to be a girl who was narrating the story. But yeah, I mean, it's nice to think that if women ruled the world, we would be less disgusting. That's a good thought. I like it.
Me too. One of the questions was, what drew you guys to climate fiction? Did you set out to write a book about climate fiction, or did it kind of come through during the process?
I didn't set out to write about climate fiction. I was kind of really concerned about it, but I didn't quite know how to engage with that concern. So no, I didn't set out, but I did want to write about our connection to nature, and the ways that the natural world can heal us. And I think the thing is that in this day and age, you kind of can't really write one without the other. I think you sort of can't really write about nature without, while avoiding climate change. Or maybe I just think that you shouldn't. It's kind of too immense a problem. So I leaned in instead, and I did a lot of research, and I discovered a number that haunts me still, and it's a number that we all know, but I think it bears repeating. It's that in the last 50 years alone, humans have killed nearly 70% of all our wild animals, all of the Earth's wildlife that has existed in time, which is just an appalling number to me. And I kind of couldn't help wondering what it would be like when we reached 100%. So that's instantly kind of when I knew the world in which I needed to set this book. It takes place as kind of a stone's throw in the future, when all the animals are during the peak of this extinction crisis, and all the animals really are dead or the last of their kind. And I think I said it there because I wanted it to feel confronting, and I wanted that change to be the only change in this kind of world that I drew, so that it would, I guess, really be clear about how close I think this possible future is. And I wanted to kind of write something that also removed us from the center of all things and kind of made the loss of the animals just terrible, because they're sort of wondrous things that should exist and have a right to exist, and we're not the only things that matter here. So yeah, I guess that's how I kind of came to it was a process for me of drawing in that environmental sort of storyline to feed Franny's personal journey.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for me, you know, I have been working in, you know, I've been working in the matter of extinction and climate change for a long time. I guess about a quarter century, a little more than a quarter century, in my day job, and so I have written about these things for a long time now. But it's not that I ever set out to write, and I think Charlotte would probably say the same, and did even maybe say a version of the same, is that I didn't set out to write any particular genre or to write within climate fiction or anything like that. It's existential. It's more sort of existential and philosophical narration that can't help but also concern this transformation that's occurring, that is clearly existential, not only for humankind but for all of the beasts and all the green things and all that lives, you know. And so I've always felt words like climate and environment they're just so weak in the English language, so wonky and clinical, you know. They don't evoke they sound tedious and I don't know, with sort of soulless, and really, you know, those words shouldn't be soulless, you know. And so I don't know, we try to write in an idiom, in a way that returns the soul to these things from which the soul has been taken away by the way that our language works, and the way that we compartmentalize the living world. And yeah, that's all I got. I'm gonna stop.
Well, I mean, works for me. I was lucky enough to get my hands on an advanced copy of Children's Bible shortly after quarantine began, and I was struck not only by how timely it was, but like also in terms of the world coming down around your ears, but also that loneliness of being one person in the middle of chaos that affects everyone around you. Both of your books deal with isolation in a really remarkable way. What made you want to write about being alone in the, you know, twilight of the world?
Should I just keep going first, or is that rude? I'll just keep going first. That's an interesting question. I think maybe this kind of end of the world that we're hurtling towards is happening because we're so alone and isolated from each other. And well, I don't know, maybe if there was more of a sense of unity among us, we'd have an easier time of slowing that end of the world. I'm not sure. I mean, I feel like sometimes it feels like we're all terrified by ourselves, and we're all sort of screaming that fear into the void and thinking that no one else can hear it. I think that's how Franny feels. She's kind of looking around at these people around her, and she doesn't understand why they don't seem to care in the same way that she does, that nobody kind of seems to care in the same way that she does. But I think they actually do, and that's the irony of it. I think most people do. So why are we in this nightmare? In any case, I kind of wanted to reach out to people. I think by having a lonely character, you can kind of do that, and maybe you can actually do that better, and you can sort of alleviate some loneliness in a weird backwards way. I think we're in our most intensely isolated time ever at the moment. I think what we really need is connection and intimacy, and I think one of the reasons you write a novel is to try and offer that or share that. I think maybe in a sense migrations is, it seems like it's about being alone at the end of the world, but really it's about reconnection at a time when it's most necessary.
Let's see. Being alone. Well, I think actually Charlotte's book is more sort of, although she has these sort of she has these pair bonds sort of that that take you through her book. But mine is more of so in a sense it's more the solitary mirroring a little bit in her book, although there are other characters on the ship and so forth around and in the but mine is more it's collective sort of. It's this group, this band of kids, and they're isolated from the outside world. So in that sense, right, aloneness, they're isolated, and they're also isolated from their parents through an act of will, partly for a lot of the book. So in the case of my book, it's more about these sort of, I don't know, not affinity groups, but groups of generational groups, I guess. I mean, for lack of a better term, cohorts, sort of this young cohort and how it manages itself and ends up sort of becoming self-directing, ends up sort of reversing the parent-child relationship when it begins to take care of the sort of the frail and unstable parents as things fall apart. So, but it's still, of course, it's also about that narrator and her little brother, and but I think really mostly the loneliness of people or groups within a world that's sort of the falling away from them, it's becoming alien and unfamiliar and chaotic. So yeah, it was sort of it's obviously not about a pandemic, although there is like sort of climate change related disease migration right in the book, but it was the shelter in place things that were happening. It had been happening for about 2 months when the book came out were coincidental. But I always think, there's no, I mean, there were interviews that I did and just conversations I had where people would, very kindly, say that the book had been prescient or whatever, but really, it wasn't prescient at all. And I would always have to say, look, no, all this stuff is just ambient. Like it doesn't take, you don't have to be a seer. I mean, all this stuff's been waiting to happen and happening elsewhere for a good long time now. It's all actually imminent. It's all already present. And so I wasn't, there was no genius in writing about the cataclysm, at this time.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely related to my next question, which is that, I mean, while I was reading these books in the current moment, they felt prophetic to me. But I was wondering if, now that we're in this moment, if either of you looking back at your books feel that your perception of your own writing has changed because of the way we're living now.
No, not really. I mean, I never, of course, predicted a global pandemic, but I'm not surprised by the other stuff that's happening in the world. Just as Lydia was just saying, we've been warned. We've been warned about this for a long time. We've had terrible bushfires in Australia. I think we're up to, they've realised it's now 3 billion animals were either dead or irreparably injured. You guys are having terrible bushfires in California at the moment. We're losing so much of our natural world. And yeah, we've just been ignoring the warnings about this stuff. So it's no surprise to me that we're in this mess. I think that's one of the reasons I wrote Migrations, to try and engage with the fear around that, and also to kind of shout a bit of a battle cry, maybe. It's something I hope energizes people, just like I hope that the pandemic and the fires and everything else that's happening energizes people. We can all be making small changes. They add up to big change, and we really need to vote the right people into power. That's kind of the major one. But no, I don't look any differently at the book, unfortunately, and maybe that's an indication of my own struggle with pessimism. I have to kind of actively not let it take over, and I have to feed the optimism all the time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess just in terms of what I'm doing right now, I have been writing since the beginning of, slightly before the pandemic, but I've been relieved to be writing it during all of this, which is it's actually nonfiction, and it's directly about it's about extinction and our love, for it's a bestiary, so it's like a kind of personal bestiary. And so, yeah, it's all about animals and extinction, about sort of religion and politics, and how they have led us to this path of this sort of a massive sacrificial moment of life forms that we find ourselves in. But also, as Charlotte was saying, it really is kind of a battle cry as well. That really is about how we should be parents, not just of our children, but, parents of the world, parents of all that is, parents of all that is, and all the being that we see around us. And so it's been, in a way, it's been good to have been writing about some of the things that have led us to this path of, Donald Trump and so forth. And at this particular moment when what is called for is so exactly the opposite of the policy and behavior that we're being led by. And so that's been, I'm not going to say comfort exactly, but it makes me feel useful, at least in my own mind. Like I'm useful to myself in doing this work. I'm actually, because it helps me to understand. I basically only understand anything by writing about it. That's when I understand things. It's how I think. And so it's been thinking. So I've been thinking in a nonfiction context instead of in fiction, which is I've never done a book length work of nonfiction before. I've written plenty of columns and plenty of essays and things, but never a whole book that also had me as a character in it. And so also the weirdness and difficulty of that have been interesting. But more than anything, I think just writing about what we're going through, because of course, it's directly the abuse of wildlife that gave us the pandemic, and the abuse of other people that gave us a president who doesn't know how to manage a pandemic. So it's been good to write directly about these things. I'm sorry if that was too long an answer for anyone. We can definitely put it open for questions now, right?
Absolutely. Let's see what we've got in here. So it looks like the first question is for Charlotte from Jesse. Charlotte, when you sit down to write, do you have literary fiction in mind, or do you just edit it into its beautiful form? Or is that just the way words come out of you? In any case, you've written one of the best novels that Jesse has read in a long time.
Oh, thank you, Jesse. That's lovely. No, I think it would be weird to be too focused on, I guess, in a sense, the product of the thing. And that's sort of that's the terrain you get into when you start thinking too much about genre, I think, because genre is very much just a guiding thing to help readers figure out what they want to read. And you know, the whole literary fiction thing, I think, is also a means of categorizing something just to help readership. So no, for me, I don't think about genre or who it's for. I just always try to write the book that I want to read. I write about the things that are interesting me at the time, and I just write as well as I can. I try and challenge myself to write as well as I can all the time. I don't always do that, of course. A lot of the time I'll look at something and go, that was really, really bad. So editing becomes your friend, of course. But yeah, no, I mean, I also try not to over edit. That's why I have my wonderful editor. She's amazing at being able to kind of cut through the fat, and I tend to overwrite and be a bit over flowery. So she's really good at kind of going, I think you made your point with the sentence before. So let's cut the last sentence. No, it's just a pouring, a spewing of words for me. I don't try to put too much, I guess, mechanics into it. Sorry, did that answer the question?
I think so, yeah. All right. Another for Charlotte. At its heart, isn't Migrations a love story with love driving the quest, both the love of nature and the love of her husband?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, and I love that's actually, it's funny, that same thing about coming back to the genre, and you know, people are talking about this book in terms of the climate fiction, which is slightly surprising to me. It's not really surprising because it is about that, but yeah, what doesn't really get mentioned, which is surprising to me, is that this is absolutely a love story at its core. I'm a massive romantic, so I will probably always write things with a beautiful core love story, because that to me is sort of a really true motivator, or I think that's one of the main things that kind of drives people to do impossible things. So yes, it's very much a love story.
For Lydia, Amy wonders about the role of the owner in the children's Bible. What purpose does she serve? It felt like a departure from the rest of the book, so what does she symbolize?
I mean, I don't really love to explicate sort of the symbol systems in my book, and the owner, I think, falls into that category. If the owner did not strike you any particular way, then if I were you as a reader, I would just write her off. You know, I mean, you know, I can't really, I can talk about what I'm trying to do sort of in broad strokes and what I'm interested in and the ideas I'm interested in. But in terms of dissecting characters and giving equivalencies for them and what they mean and stuff, I feel like that is your domain. And if something doesn't resonate with you, that is fine. You know, that is absolutely okay. But yeah, so sorry not to be able to be more mathematical about that.
No, I think that's fine. Let's see. We have a lot of questions for Charlotte. Diane says the story blew her away. Did you have a sense of the whole story before you started the novel? Did both novels start with a worry of the future or something more character-based? And she would also like to know what everybody is reading.
Yeah, so I think in terms of knowing how I want the story to go, I'm just going to be really practical here. I map my stories out into a 3-act structure, and then I place my little key beats of just the major moments that I know I want to happen. And I always have a general sense of where I want to write to, but that will be about as much planning as I'll do, and then I'll kind of let the characters take over. And Franny was definitely someone who kind of did that for me. She was very much her own creature, and she sort of led the way through the book. And I think if you do the character work, then it's possible for that to happen, which is, there's so much joy in that, in letting the character kind of take over and find her own way through the scenes and the story. So, I mean, I knew what I wanted the ending to be, but there were certain things throughout that surprised me along the way, for sure. And that's where the pleasure is, I think, in writing. What was the rest of that question?
Oh, I think she wanted to know what you were reading right now.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've just finished a children's Bible, which I absolutely loved. It was amazing and savagely funny, whilst also very profound. The ending, I got a little bit teary in that final scene. Beautiful final scene. Oh, my God.
Oh, thank you.
What else? I'm excited to dive into, I'm about to read, I don't know if he's as big over in America, but there's a writer in Australia called Trent Dalton, and he's kind of been like a major smash hit here. His first novel was called A Boy Swallows Universe, and it's kind of this amazing, also very funny but very emotional book. So I'm about to dive into his new one. Yeah, that's probably enough from me. Lydia, how about you?
Oh, let's see. I've been reading this really good book in translation by, I believe she might be Argentine. I could be wrong. South American. Her name is Bettina Gonzalez. It's called American Delirium, I think it's called. And it's really odd and good. And then I've been reading a sort of more of a bestseller type nonfiction book from a few years ago that some of you probably have read, or probably read long ago, called H is for Hawk, about by the English writer Ellen MacDonald, about taming a goshawk after her father's death. So as I'm writing this bestiary, I'm reading a lot of nonfiction, more than I usually do. Let's see, just reviewed a book for the New York Times, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that before it comes out. So forget it. Let's see. But yeah, a lot of Eugene Linden, who writes about animal sensitivity and sort of people's anecdotes about their encounters with. He also wrote a book called The Ragged Edge of the World, and he's sort of naturalist kind of writer who writes a lot about the subjectivity of other kinds of critters. And so that's some of it.
Awesome. We have another question for Lydia from Susan. There's a confrontation between teens and parents near the end of the novel where the teens basically say, "You let us down," and the parents just say they got tired of fighting. And Susan would like to know how she can help the younger generation not burn out and turn into drinkers and talkers.
So how you personally, Susan, can? Is that what you mean? Wow, you're really trusting me. Yeah. Okay. So royal we. Well, I mean, I think it starts with the recognition that we have been extraordinarily sort of smug and passive in certain ways. I mean, our smugness wasn't always intentional, and it certainly isn't monolithic. And we are not, as the parents are in this novel, a uniform group of dissipated assholes, obviously. So I think some of you out there are probably doing a lovely job with the young people, whether they be your children or others. I simply feel that we turned away, and this had a lot to do not with us as individuals in the generation, but really it did have a tremendous amount to do with the real villains of this piece, which are really not regular people, but which are the fossil fuel complex and utilities and related, the petrochemical industry and just about everyone else out there in the corporate world who actively, and Exxon, I hear today, is still doing this, actively suppressed climate science and for now, almost half a century until they were forced to cop to it. Those entities did so much damage, such an incredible amount of damage, and then worked really hard to tell us that it was because we didn't recycle enough, and this is actually actual fact that I'm sharing now. This is not some made up lefty, conspiracy. This is what happened. And they continue to try to sell us on recycling when actually only, 5% of plastics in the world ever get recycled. The oil industry is even now building out a massive single-use plastics petrochemical complex in the US because they're convinced that plastics demand is where they're going to make their money in the coming decades. So there really are bad actors out there in the world, and I don't think that it's fair to blame those of us who aren't powerful for these errors, for these sins that have been committed against the world and against the rest of us and against our children and their children and the ones who come after. So I think we first of all should hold those responsible who are responsible and not constantly just blame our bad habits as consumers. Not that we don't have to change our patterns of consumption and production, because we do, but you and I can't do that alone sitting in our houses. We're not going to. All we can do is, as Charlotte said, elect the right people and not the terribly, terribly wrong people, and listen to science, respect science, like respect the work of other people. I live out in the desert in Arizona, and I know a couple people whose politics are completely different from mine and who don't believe in science. And it's funny because, and each of them is actually, the one in particular who I'm thinking of, who's a woman and a mother, and she absolutely doesn't believe the science, sort of establishment science on anything. And yet, when people's children, are accepted to like colleges to study science or something like that, she thinks it's wonderful. So, and she supports them. And, so the thing is that I think we've allowed this trend in our culture, in our very anti-education culture that we have in the US, which also exists in Australia, I know, but I think not to quite the degree, but it might be, there might be some parity there, but we've allowed that to sort of turn people against science in a way that now is directly harming all of us. And it's because I think a lot of people don't think of science as people. Like a lot of the American population is not out there not understanding just the devotion and the dedication of individual people that actually is science, and what peer review means. There's just a lack of understanding about what makes good science, and indeed what makes true information that we're seeing in the culture now. So, what distinguishes fact from fiction? Why is it important that people in power not constantly lie? Why is it important that we have some kind of consensus on factual reality in the culture, and enough of us are losing sight of all of those things that it presents, a clear and present danger to the rest of us and to those people themselves too, and the rest of the world, the natural world and the human world. So, I think first, vote, love science and share your love of science, science as people, and listen to the young and listen to their anger and don't be defensive. I speak for myself too, don't be defensive about that anger, because the anger is what we need right now. You know, we need anger, and we need the anger of the young.
I think that
Thank
leads
you.
nicely
That was
into.
amazing.
Oh, sorry.
I just said thank you. That was amazing.
Yeah, and I think this will be our final question. It's a question for both of you. Are there writers who you feel who write about the natural world who are particularly vital and galvanizing right now?
Well, for me, I don't know if she's galvanizing. She was galvanizing for me. I always come back to Mary Oliver. She's just the queen for me. I love her. I love her poetry. It is very, very meaningful to me because it was kind of the first thing maybe that I was reading that really opened me up to, I guess, the power of the connection that we can have with nature and how incredibly feeding and nourishing that it can be. I've also been really enjoying reading, there's a Scottish nature writer called Jim Crumley, and he writes beautifully about nature, and I recently read his book on the Scottish wolves and that idea of the debate around whether or not we should reintroduce them, which is actually what my new book is about. So that was really helpful in terms of the research for that. So they would probably be my two main ones. Oh, and the Overstory. I mean, I know that it's fiction, but I thought that was kind of beautifully done, and I've never looked at trees the same way again. Lydia,
I think I speak for everyone when I say that we're really excited to hear you're working on a new book. Can't wait to read it. And Lydia, did you also have any authors that you?
Oh, well, I was going to say for a poet, I really like, and actually his prose is amazing too, who recently died, would be W.S. Merwin. I think he's really, really lovely and genius. So yeah, W.S. Merwin. Yeah, I like Richard Powers too, especially the passages in that book that specifically are about trees. That's what I like in that book. I don't really dig the passages about activists. They don't work for me that well, but the stuff about the trees is amazing. Like that could have just been a book by itself, you know? And he's a sweet guy too. Let's see, who else on nature? I mean, there's, you know, I used to really dislike writing about nature. I mean, like writing about nature, I found it really boring. Now as writing about nature is less sort of pastoral and more life or death, and you know, I find myself drawn to it more. But although I also grew up with people like, I don't know if you guys would like Gerald Durrell or Gerald Durrell, as we used to say his name. You know, sort of like anecdotes of family life mixed in with, you know, with animal stuff, or like James Herriot. You know, All Creatures Great and Small, very famous in the UK and Canada, where I grew up. So stuff that sort of, I like things that sort of are not just sort of devotional or sort of transcendentalists with regard to nature and animals sort of, but that investigate our sort of personal encounters and relationships with animals. There's some really good things, you know, by Barry Lopez. Great book of essays by Joy Williams called Ill Nature. Excellent, excellent book of essays if you're interested in nonfiction. I don't know, I could go on, but I'll stop talking, I think.
All right, well, I think we're coming right up at the edge of the end of our time together. I want to thank you guys both so much for taking the time to talk with us. And to everyone who's watching and listening, these books are amazing. You can buy them at the link at the bottom from Belmont Books. So thank you to everyone who came out. Please make sure to check out the upcoming events in October on belmontbooks.com. And yeah, thank you for coming. It's been wonderful to get to meet you guys.
Thanks, Olivia. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Prayers unite.
Great to meet you.
It was great to meet you, Lydia. I loved your book.
I love you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.